Think back to the 17th century when the Spanish Empire stood as the unchallenged giant of the world. From its throne in Madrid, it controlled vast territories across continents, but the real power pulsed from the silver mines of Potosi in South America and the gold fields of Mexico. This wasn't just wealth for show, it was the fuel for endless wars, the collateral for loans from bankers in Genoa and Germany. Without it, Spain's armies in Europe would grind to a halt. Every year, the Silver Fleet, or Flota de Indias, made that perilous journey across the Atlantic, carrying the empire's fiscal lifeline back to Seville. Stopping that fleet wasn't just piracy, it was like cutting the artery of a superpower. And on September 8, 1628, in the quiet waters of Matanzas Bay, Cuba, that's exactly what happened. For the first and only time, an entire treasure convoy fell into enemy hands, not through a bloody sea battle, but a calculated strike by a Dutch force. It was the work of Admiral Piet Hein and the Dutch West India Company, turning a daring raid into a pivot that reshaped global power. We're examining the Silver Fleet seizure of 1628, the setup, the execution, the haul that shocked Europe, and how a band of what the Spanish called sea beggars exposed the fragility of an empire built on distant riches. To see why this capture hit so hard, we need to understand Spain's setup. By the early 1600s, the empire was hooked on American silver like an addict. Despite ruling over huge lands, Spain produced little at home. Grain, weapons, even basics came from abroad, all paid for that New World metal. The crown operated on credit, borrowing heavily from foreign bankers who advanced funds based on the promise of the next fleet's arrival. Often the silver was pledged before it even left the Americas. The fleet system was rigid and predictable, designed for protection. It split into branches, one from Mexico, another from South America. They'd rendezvous in Havana, combine forces, and sail for Spain under heavy escort. This routine was Spain's strength, massive galleons armed to the teeth, but also its Achilles heel. Enemies knew the routes, the timings, and the vulnerabilities. Pirates and privateers had nibbled at the edges before, but no one had dared a full assault on the convoy itself. Enter the Dutch Republic, a scrappy upstart fighting for independence from Spanish rule in the 80 Years' War. Unlike Spain's top-down monarchy, the Dutch were a merchant republic where trade and war blended seamlessly. In 1621, they chartered the Dutch West India Company, or WIC, not just a trading outfit, but a privatized war machine. Investors in Amsterdam bought shares, essentially funding raids on Spanish colonies and shipping in exchange for profits from captured goods.
The WIC's goal was economic warfare, disrupt Spain's silver flow to starve its military. They targeted the silver pipeline, knowing that hitting the fleet would do more damage than any battlefield victory. By 1628, the company had honed its tactics through smaller operations in the Caribbean and Brazil. It equipped fleets with fast, maneuverable ships, seasoned crews, and commanders who thought like merchants as much as warriors. Piet Hein was the perfect man for the job. Born in 1777, he'd spent his early years at sea, even enduring 4 years as a Spanish galley slave after a capture in 1597. That experience hardened him and gave him insider knowledge of Spanish naval habits. Freed in a prisoner exchange, he rose through the Dutch ranks, becoming a vice admiral in the WIC. Hein wasn't a reckless pirate. He was a strategist, patient and precise. His 1628 mission was clear: intercept the Mexican fleet,
before it linked up with the stronger South American escorts in Havana. With 31 ships under his command, carrying around 2,300 sailors and 1,000 soldiers, Hein set sail in the spring. His flagship, the Amsterdam, bristled with guns, but the plan relied on surprise and positioning, not brute force. The Dutch lurked off Cuba's coast, scouting for the Spanish approach. Intelligence was key. Hein knew the fleet's schedule from captured pilots and spies. The Spanish side was led by Juan de Benavides, a commander more accustomed to court politics than sea fights. Inexperienced in naval tactics, he commanded a convoy heavy with treasure but light on agility. The ships were overloaded, their gun ports sometimes blocked by cargo, making them sitting ducks if cornered. Benavides sailed with confidence, believing any threats were far north. But as his fleet neared Cuba in early September, scouts spotted sails on the horizon. What followed wasn't a grand clash of cannons, but a masterful trap. Hein maneuvered his ships to cut off escape routes, herding the Spanish toward Matanzas Bay, a shallow and closed harbor that looked safe but was a dead end for deep-draft galleons. Panicking, Benavides ordered his vessels in, hoping to fortify on shore. Instead, they ran aground in the mud, immobilized like beached whales. Hein closed in methodically. With the Spanish stuck, he sent boarding parties. Resistance was minimal. The crews, demoralized and outgunned, surrendered quickly. In hours, the Dutch had control of 16 ships without significant losses. Some Spaniards fled ashore, grabbing what gold and silver they could carry, but the bulk remained aboard. Hein had pulled off the impossible, capturing the treasure without a full-scale battle. Now, the audit of the haul. The cargo was staggering. Silver bars and coins from Mexican mines, gold ingots, chests of indigo and cochineal dyes, vital for European textiles. Silks from Asia routed through Manila, pearls, spices, and other luxuries. The silver alone filled holds, representing months of imperial revenue. In Dutch terms, the total value hit around 15 million guilders, a fortune that could sustain their entire military for a year. Counting and securing it took days. Hein's men inventoried meticulously, ensuring fair division under Wick rules. The admiral himself took a modest share, but investors back home reaped massive dividends, up to 50% in one payout, the largest ever recorded. For the Dutch Republic, this windfall was a game-changer, funding sieges and campaigns that pushed Spain back in the Low Countries. For Spain, the loss was catastrophic. The silver was already earmarked for creditors. Its absence triggered a spike in borrowing costs. The Crown faced partial bankruptcy, scrambling to cover obligations. Benavides was court-martialed and executed for incompetence, a scapegoat for systemic flaws. The empire's transatlantic lifeline, once seen as invincible, now looked vulnerable. Privateers smelled blood, and attacks on convoys intensified. This heist marked a shift in power. The Dutch Golden Age accelerated, with Amsterdam's exchanges buzzing from the influx. Art, science, and trade flourished on the back of Spanish silver. Spain, meanwhile, entered a slow decline, spending more on fleet defenses than the treasure yielded. The rigid system that once ensured security now highlighted weaknesses, predictable routes, over-reliance on distant resources, and a failure to adapt. The 1628 seizure wasn't mere luck, it was corporate warfare at its finest. The Wick blended profit motive with national strategy, proving that a merchant state could outmaneuver a traditional empire. Hein's precision, waiting for the right moment, exploiting enemy errors, set a template for future operations. In the broader sweep, this event exposed the perils of resource dependency. Spain's curse of silver meant wealth flowed in, but didn't build lasting structures at home. Inflation eroded gains, and corruption siphoned funds. The Dutch, by contrast, invested spoils wisely, fostering innovation and resilience. Echoes linger today. Economies tied to single commodities face similar risks. Boom, followed by bust when flows disrupt. The seizure reminds us that no supply chain is ironclad, especially when rivals innovate. For Spain, it was the beginning of the end of hegemony. For the Dutch, a launchpad to prominence. This has been an Imperial Audit. History's audits reveal that empires fall not from strength's absence, but from ignoring their own fragilities.